Welcome back to another Boxscore Geek show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez. With me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. And today we're going to be talking free agency and trades, and we're just skipping the draft, Brian. You know what? We've said this before on the draft. Don't count on the draft for next year. You really shouldn't. The NBA has some of the most reliable statistics year to year of any sports team, of sports league. If you are a team that is looking for trades and signings, it should be the place, Brian, where advanced analytics gives you a huge edge, and we should see lots of Moneyball teams. And so today we're going to be talking a lot of trades and signings that show teams still don't get it, even the ones that do, because I guarantee what's going to happen, Brian. We've looked through this list already. We're going to Spotrac.com, looking over the transactions and the free agent signings there. We'll see teams where we're like A plus, amazing move to pick up that player, immediately followed by what the hell were you thinking? So with that in mind, let's get going. We're going to start with transactions, and we are going to make me sad. So Brian, I'm just going to give a RIP to the brief title window the Nuggets had. It's going to be up there for years. The brief window where Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Aaron, how am I missing the name? Last name of Aaron. You've liked it before.
Aaron Holiday? No.
Aaron,
No, we were talking
anyway,
about him, yeah.
Yeah, but and Michael Porter Jr. When those four players were healthy, the Nuggets were a contender, and then Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray both got injured, or Jamal Murray got injured in the regular season. Michael Porter Jr. got injured in the playoffs, and it was all over. And the Nuggets since then have been in a free fall. Case in point, June 23rd, the Nuggets traded off JaMychal Green and some picks, or JaMychal Green basically for Payton Watson and some picks. Payton Watson, I think, is a young player or rookie or whatever, but basically just the Nuggets with players like Austin Rivers and Jeff Green. They've got enough bad players on their squad, and they're starting to atrophy some of their productive players outside of Nikola Jokic. So it just makes me sad, but that is what it is.
Yeah, it does seem like all the Nuggets have another move they made that we're going to talk about later, what was also a cost-cutting effort. So, yeah, it's unfortunate for Nuggets fans this offseason.
I had not thought we were going to get to this, Brian, but this is a funny point I want to bring up. So a common thing that we wind up in the NBA is small market versus big market. And when we talk trades and signings, et cetera, people will say, well, Memphis has no hope of competing with the Knicks, which, hilarious, right? Well, Memphis has no hope of competing with the Knicks because they're in a small market, and who wants to play in Memphis? And the Knicks can spend all this money, yada, yada, yada. And an interesting thing that I ran into recently, I was looking over all of the owners of NBA teams. And for those that don't know, the Nuggets are owned or were owned by a Kroenke. And what ended up happening, there are rules, like the most fake antitrust rules you can kind of have. You're not allowed to own more than two major league teams in the United States. So Kroenke, I believed, owned the Rams. The Rams, the Avalanche, go Avs, by the way. They just won a title. I've got another funny story on that in just a second. And then the Nuggets. And so when he acquired the Rams, he had to sell his ownership in the Nuggets, which he basically sold to his son. So it's just funny, like wink, nudge thing. And then actually what ended up happening is he married a Walton being the people that own Walmart, some of the richest people. And the current owner of the Nuggets is one of the Walton heirs, and she is one of the richest people in the world as well. So like Kroenke is a really rich person. This is very, almost royalty based, right? If we're looking like England. So we have two of the richest families that are married that own the Nuggets. And then the Nuggets are going to be like, we don't have the money to pay, which is hilarious. And I hate it so much that billionaires are able to fleece our tax system in our country this way, to basically do that, to say, give us money in small markets so we can afford a sports team. We can't afford to spend our money on the sports team. The reason they can't afford to spend the money isn't that they can't afford to spend it. It's that they would rather, instead of the Waltons and the Kroenkes, despite the fact that they have more money than they could ever spend, would rather get more free tax money than spend some of their money to get a winning team. That's the long and short of it. So it is very frustrating as a Nuggets fan to both hear people fall hook, line, and sinker for the line the Nuggets can't compete. They're in a small market when they're owned by some of the richest people ever. And the reality is these rich people are just ultra greedy. So it's depressing, and I hate it. And by the way, the Rockies are the same. So at least the Avalanche won a Stanley Cup despite being the fact that they're owned by a Kroenke, and I think the Rams did too. So there you go. So the rich get titles and the rich get tax breaks, and nothing is fair, Brian. The end. All right. Next trade I'm going to go over just as a brief point, which is the New York Knicks acquired, I believe it's Usman Jang, and they traded 3 first-round picks that are all top, lottery protected. And this is just a big observation in terms of trades that we've had, which is draft picks aren't worth anything, especially to a team like the Knicks that has enough money to just pay for draft picks. So if you like a player, I have no idea. I've not looked at the numbers because he's an international player, not an NCAA player. I have no idea if Usman is great. That being said, if you like a young player and you want to acquire them, you can always just trade picks and know that you can recoup them later.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out for Oklahoma City, they have so many draft picks that they can't really draft all those players and have roster spots for them. So they're getting to the point where they kind of have to start using draft picks.
Exactly. I mean, you stockpile a bunch of draft picks. You can always trade. You can either do one of two things. You can trade them forward. So if I have a first round pick this year, I can trade it forward for next year. And that's oftentimes a wise move. So, I mean, the 2001 draft, I want to say, with Kenyon Martin is regarded as one of the worst. There are drafts where you're just like, I hate everybody in this draft. I'll just trade forward. Or you can consolidate picks and trade. And then if you need to recoup some picks, you trade some players for picks or buy picks outright. An interesting one, Brian. Memphis is just all over the place with good moves, bad moves. But Memphis traded Melton for Danny Green, basically. And at first glance, I thought this was bad because Danny Green was a player that, for instance, really helped the Spurs back in the day and really helped the Toronto Raptors. But that should be the telltale sign. He's been around for a while. He is not looking as great as he has recently, and Melton looked okay. So this isn't a great trade. It's not horrible. It's not going to hurt anybody. But it did, it's one of these where like Memphis is doing some good stuff and some bad stuff, which we'll talk later. And this is just an example of like, kind of ho-hum, but it's not enough to knock them one way or the other. We were talking a little pre-show. Basically, the Memphis Grizzlies' only problem right now is Dylan Brooks and Jeremy Jackson. They have Brandon Clark, one of your favorites, who is starting to look like a legit star. They have a bunch of great players, including some low-paid ones. One we'll get to is like Tyus Jones, who's underpaid, and John Morant, who is also one of your favorites. Brian, is Memphis your team, by the way? You loved all of their draft
I
picks.
do love Memphis. Until they were like doing cheap shots on the Warriors in the playoffs this year, I was loving Memphis.
I completely forgot about that. And then that also made it easy. Where it was hard for me to root for Memphis versus the Warriors in the playoffs. And as soon as Memphis did that crap, I was like, I'm done rooting for Memphis. And I thought I was going to be sad. I was like, oh no, they injured Gary Payton. The Warriors are out of it. And then Gary Payton came back and they won. So it was fine all around.
And then the Warriors stiffed him financially, but we'll get to that later.
Well, not really. We will
we'll get to that later.
Okay, so this one is just kind of funny, and that I was shocked at how much of a no trade this was, which is the Dallas Mavericks acquire Christian Wood for just a bunch of mediocre players, including one that's kind of saddened me, and maybe his time has passed, which is Boban. So there we go. Sorry, and Christian Wood just is not a great looking center except for 1 year. So this is really weird. I have no idea. I have no read on Christian Wood. So I'll say this. Dallas acquired the player that's young and has upside, but I have no idea how to place him because he looked good as a rookie for Philly, really good for Charlotte, great for New Orleans, bad for Milwaukee, actually in limited time. But then actually I'm kind of wrong here, Brian. In the time that he played up till 2020, Christian Wood looked really good. But for the last 2 years with Houston, he has not looked great. Now, it's possible. So despite the fact that we have bashed the Mavericks in past for this kind of thinking, it is possible their thinking is Houston wasn't using him correctly. We can use him right. And there is definitely history to the count. There's past history to support this. Philly, Charlotte, New Orleans, Detroit. He looked good on all of those teams. He didn't look good on Houston if they're thinking, okay, we can do that. And, Boban's one of these players that just has never really been able to get the minutes, and all the other players involved in the trade, Sterling Brown, Trey Burke, Marquise Chris. I have no idea on Wendell Moore Jr. I think he's like a rookie. None of these players look great. So, I mean, I think this is a good upshot play for Dallas. I don't think he was the best center. I think people are noting as soon as they went for Christian Wood, it was obvious Rudy Gobert was off the table, which of course is true. But that being said, it's an okay trade. I like it. I like any trade where you go for upside without having to give up too much, and that's the key point. Dallas didn't give up anything. The only players they had to give up, ironically, and one they did for free, the only players they had to give up are Luka Doncic and Jalen Brunson. So as long as you don't give up those two players, you're fine. So here's hoping the Warriors, sorry, Brian, the Mavericks didn't give up one of those two players.
Yeah, and the Mavericks probably are responding to getting crushed by the Warriors in the playoffs because they just had no size down low, right? The Warriors got to the rim so easily, and Dallas did not put very much resistance on defense. So they're bringing in Christian Wood actually to be the power forward. He is not going to play center because they also signed JaVale McGee to a 3-year deal. He's going to be the starting center. So the Mavericks just got a lot bigger and spent the money there instead of on Jalen Brunson. So what are they going to do about Jalen Brunson? Well, they're hoping on injured players to come back. And we talked about this before. The reason why Jalen Brunson got to emerge this year finally, he got a lot of extra minutes because Dinwiddie and Tim Hardaway Jr. were hurt. And those two are still under contract and going to be coming back. I think they're going to start Dinwiddie in Brunson's place, and then Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to come off the bench. So
for the team that let go, we'll just talk JaVale McGee here instead of in free agency.
Yeah.
But for the team that let go of like Tyson Chandler, taking a flyer on ancient JaVale McGee is something, but he did look okay last year for Phoenix. Interestingly enough, Tyson Chandler looked okay in a year for Phoenix. So
the thing I'll say about JaVale McGee is he's been around forever, but he's only 34. He's the same age as Steph Curry. Tougher when you're a big man sometimes, but he's been playing great even into his mid-30s.
All right, this one is painful, and there is really no justification here. So, by the way, Atlanta has decided to completely lock up their point guard spot. Atlanta looks, I guess you can really say that they'll think of Trae Young as either kind of like an Allen Iverson, like a shoot first point guard, so like in the shooting guard position. But Atlanta acquires DeJounte Murray, essentially for Danilo Gallinari and a bunch of picks.
4 first-round picks.
Who cares? Who gives a damn? Because let me just verify this. DeJounte Murray last year was one of the top point guards in the league, 12.9 wins produced, over 250 wins per 48. Looked fantastic. And this basically followed the progression. Now, DeJounte Murray, I believe back in the day when he signed with the Spurs, what we noted was this. He looked okay he looked bad as a rookie in 322 minutes. He looked really, really good as a sophomore in 1,700 minutes, but then he got injured his junior year. So he's injured. But they re-signed him, but it wasn't to an expensive deal. So as a result, what our take is, okay, he's injured, right. But if he comes back 50% of what he was playing for you the last year, he's worth the money and his upside is clearly higher. So if he gets healthy. And then did he get healthy? Boom. Year 3, year 4, year 5, just, year 3 and 4 is absolutely worth the money. And then last year, boom, explodes, plays like a star. So there is no, he was worth the money and is on a great contract. And so them getting rid of DeJounte Murray for picks is ridiculous. And I can't, what's been really weird about the Spurs for a while, as an example, is if you're kind of trying to talk about them as a rebuilding team, DeJounte Murray is young. Like even if you think you're rebuilding, he's 25. The key point I want to give on a lot of players is you really want to look at them in that 26 to 30 year range. That is when you want to aim for them, right? Because that's when you can get their contract. And actually, DeJounte Murray's got 2 years left on his deal. This makes absolutely no sense because you never know what you're going to get on draft picks. Danilo Gallinari, I've loved, but is just old. This is a bad deal. Spurs, man, the Spurs days of being great, of trading and drafting might be over. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, so what it looks like happened is the Spurs just decided ahead of time we're not going to be able to pay him eventually. So let's, strike while the iron's hot. I'm with you. Let's let it play out another year or two. But yeah, I mean, the Spurs seem to be going for the full rebuild now, which is good because they have a lot of veterans that aren't great. So ship out those veterans. They probably should have rebuilt with Murray, but they decided not to for whatever reason. He's a really interesting fit with Trae Young on the Hawks. I don't know. I've always seen Murray as kind of like a young Russell Westbrook. He can't shoot threes at all, but he kind of does everything else, and he's a triple-double machine, waiting to happen sometimes. So on the other hand, Trae Young, I don't think he's necessarily that great off the ball. He gets compared to Steph Curry a lot with his long-range shooting, but he really likes to have the ball in his hands. It's not clear to me he could be an off-ball player if, Murray's going to have the ball in his hands. So the Hawks are adding a lot of talent. We'll talk about other, moves they've done, but yeah, Hawks are a very interesting team, and I mostly like what they're doing.
DeJounte Murray is a star in spite of his scoring because
Yeah.
I've kind of talked this a lot when you're looking at players such like I was talking Andrew Wiggins a few articles ago at nerdnumbers.substack.com and noted that he's not a good shooter, and he's not a good shooter at like 56% true shooting, which if you teleported, if you took Andrew Wiggins and kind of did a cheat code and teleported him back into the mid 90s, right, and put him on, let's say, the Jazz, he would smoke the Bulls. The Bulls would be like, who the hell is this cheat code player that you have transported? Because the NBA improves, the NBA gets better. That's a point we've been making, kind of about the salary cap. In an article I wrote on Jalen Brunson, something you and I have said back and forth a lot, is the modern salary cap is really hard to gauge because it just keeps going up. The salary cap in the NBA is like over 110 million right now, and that is just like the floor. There's like three levels. The NBA is a soft cap league, so like the average NBA team last season spent 130 million dollars. So you're allowed to spend over the salary cap for things like bird rights, et cetera. And there's some punitive stuff, and that's why teams like the Warriors, it seems silly when they're finagling over $1 or $2 million, but it really is like, if they're at $2 million, they're in like tier 3, and if they're at $1 million on like an extra player, like on the 12th player on their bench, they're in tier 2. Oops, just scared my dog. And it's really worth getting into that tier 2 if you're a billionaire that doesn't want to lose money, because you've already made all your money from taxes. But anyway, dog's really interested in this. So it's really hard to gauge players, but the number we kind of came up with is like 25 million is an average NBA starter. And so all sorts of stuff like that. The league has gotten better in terms of production, and the salaries have gone up too. So it's really hard to compare numbers generation to generation. DeJounte Murray is a bad shooter at 53% true shooting. If he goes to a team where he doesn't need to shoot as much, with next to Trae Young, he shouldn't.
Yeah.
I think his production goes up. So to your point, the real question is, if you look at the assists that DeJounte Murray and Trae Young put up, of course, it is impossible for them both to stay that high. So the question is how those redistribute and what that looks like.
They could also stagger the minutes too, right? One of them is going to be out there at all times.
A strategy that does not happen enough, including like John Havlicek kind of thing. Players that come off the bench but still get like 36 minutes, I'm shocked that is still not caught on in the NBA. And I think it needs teams that are willing to just like give a max contract to a player and then play them as a bench player. But there's also stuff like all-star starting stuff, because to your point, that is right. And a lot of teams run into that issue, which is they want to play players together and it's hard to stagger. But if the Hawks can make sure that Murray and Trae Young are staggered, like basically of the 48 minutes, one of them was always on the court, that looks really good. Okay, another blockbuster trade, Brian. I know you and I love this. This is definitely a funny one. Malcolm Brogdon to the Boston Celtics. I love this, and in reality, I want Malcolm Brogdon on the Boston Celtics to help down the Milwaukee Bucks in the playoffs. I was incensed that the Milwaukee Bucks let him go. Very similar to what I was saying about the Nuggets. The Milwaukee Bucks are a small market team, but they're owned by a very rich person who got tax cuts for the team. So when someone rich gets public money for their team and has a title squad and is like, well, I don't want to spend the money to get a title squad, I hate it. And so the Bucks really, with the core they had, legitimately should have 2 or 3 finals appearances at minimum, if not 2 or 3 titles. And to only have one is kind of egregious. And part of the reason is they let Malcolm Brogdon walk because they didn't want to pay up the money. So I'm really happy. He looked good in Indiana. I'm sad that he's kind of leaving there, and they didn't get much back. That was kind of the shocking part about this, is looking at what Indiana got back. Stauskas, I do love that. I do love that Stauskas is still bouncing around the NBA. Really, Malik Fitz, I think I want to say it, and that first round pick are all that matters. And for a player like Brogdon, with how good he is on a contender, right? That's the point. The Boston Celtics are a contender right now. That's worth it. Upgrade, and you're doing good. So this is a fantastic trade for the Celtics, and I'm excited to see where they go.
Yeah, so far to me, this is the best move of the offseason in the Celtics' favor. It's not clear to me why Brogdon didn't return more value for the Pacers, so that's a little surprising. But, when I'm thinking back to the NBA Finals and what was the Celtics' biggest problem? Well, so first of all, they lost to the Warriors in 5, but it was probably a little bit closer than that. The games were not all blowouts. Oh, is it 6? I'm sorry. I'm giving them.
You correctly refuse to acknowledge that bullshit run that they came back that was supposed to be over, because it's not a finals, Brian, if the Warriors don't give up a big lead.
Right. The point is, the Celtics came really close to winning the finals, and what was their biggest problem? Rob Williams, the Time Lord, had to play hurt and wasn't his full strength. What was their number 2 problem for me? It was the point guard play, right? I've joked about this throughout the playoffs, but you've got a player who's the defensive player of the year, so that means I'm going to go take over the ball on offense and go isolation and jack up a lot of threes. That really hurt them. So bringing in Brogdon to be the starting point guard, who is more of a real point guard, I think that's on offense anyway. I think that's such a big help for the Celtics.
Love it. Okay, now this one is going to make me sad too, Brian. Just the Nuggets being ridiculous. The Nuggets give up Monty Morris, who is on such a cheap deal and a good player, and people like Greg Steele have said he's a really good defender. And Will Barton. Now, Will Barton is a player that in past has looked great, but has just never been healthy. This last season was like the closest to it. He was close to average, but the weak position, that's not great. But like in early days, Will Barton looked like he was going to be part of a core, right? In 2020, actually, I'm going to have to look if in 2020 and 2021 there was some overlap with that, what I was saying, a contending squad. So Will Barton's not great, but Monty Morris is really good. But KCP and Ish Smith is who the Nuggets got back. And neither of those players is good. And this really is a salary dump because the Nuggets sent 24 million out the door and brought back in 19. So clear. And the thing is, I get you. Will Barton's overpaid. And Will Barton's not overpaid in that he was a bad signing. He's overpaid in that he got injured. That's always the rough part. But to get rid of that contract, they had to ship out a good player, and that is just painful. And the Nuggets have gotten worse. And another team we'll talk in a minute, which is the Pistons. It's like if you were a team that just keeps progressively adding mediocre players to your squad, you eventually run out of minutes, right? You're gonna be giving those minutes to some players, or one of your good players is going to get injured and you're going to play him, and that's terrible. So it just makes me sad. The Nuggets have made 2 bad trades on this list, and just makes me depressed, Brian.
Yeah, anytime you're a fan and your team does a salary dump, that's just like, why am I tuning in? What's the point here?
All right,
why should I care if they don't care?
Exactly. And I mean, we've kind of had that discussion for years about the weird belief of like fair weather fans, where it's going, if I have a restaurant that just suddenly starts violating the health code, and I'm like, I'm not going to go there anymore, no one looks at me weird. Whereas if I have a sports team where suddenly they start shedding cap and playing horribly and not making the playoffs, people are like, oh my goodness, how can you not go? So all right, Brian, this is the meat and potatoes, is the huge one.
July 6th. We're still on July 6th.
July 6th, the day that will live in infamy in NBA trade history, maybe. Minnesota Timberwolves acquire Rudy Gobert in exchange for 5 first-round picks, Bolmaro, Jared Vanderbilt, Walker Kessler, Patrick Beverly, Malik Beasley. Now, this is really fascinating, Brian. This reminds me a lot of the Charles Barkley trade back in the day, in that you can legitimately make the argument that Utah did acquire assets that were worth the star. We have for years thought that Rudy Gobert is an MVP caliber player. An example, last year, if we had our druthers and did our voting, and I think you and I actually agreed, Brian, on this, just like take the total wins and boom, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Last year, it would have been Jokic, Gobert, Giannis, Chris Paul, Rob Williams.
You're talking MVP voting, right? MVP
voting. So Rudy Gobert was second in MVP voting last year, would have been second the year before, would have been, fourth the year before that in 2020. I believe there was a year he was first. Second in 2019. Man, he's like always a bridesmaid, never the top one, right? Never, always a bridesmaid, never the bride. So anyway, for the last 4 seasons, Rudy Gobert has been top 5 in wins produced in the season in the NBA. Has won Defensive Player of the Year 3 times. Clearly the best player in the deal. But where this gets interesting to me is the following. Jared Vanderbilt looked spectacular last season, and I believe you're the one that told me like he's a good defender too.
Yeah, that's especially like he can't shoot very much yet, but he's already just he was one of the main reasons why the Timberwolves had this resurgence last year, is because you've got, Towns and Russell are just purely offensive players. Vanderbilt hellbound the defense for them.
Other player that looked really good last year actually was Patrick Beverley. And we've talked about him in a funny way, which is to say that Patrick Beverley is a player that has looked old and beat up. And so he was like, people were doubting me last season. It's like, well, they were right to. He looked good. We'll see how he comes back. But in reality, Vanderbilt and Beverly are on paper as good as Gobert. So we'll see what this actually does to improvement. Now, part of the good thing about this for the Wolves is, right, they sent some bad players out the door too, Malik Beasley as an example. So in theory, if they give Gobert more minutes than they gave Vanderbilt and give some of those other players fewer, they'll do good. This is close to being even, excluding even the picks, in my opinion. So curious your opinion on that.
Yeah, no, I agree. It is so I value the picks more than you, but less than probably the mainstream. I'm somewhere in the middle on the picks, but yeah, we were talking about before the show. The Timberwolves were crowing that they got to keep Jaden. What's his name? I don't have it up in front of me, but
neither of us know. Yeah,
yeah, a different power forward that's not as good as Jared Vanderbilt. I wonder if Vanderbilt's like, look, I'm not going to be able to be a starter because we're going to talk about this later too. The Timberwolves signed Kyle Anderson slow-mo to be their starting power forward. So Vanderbilt maybe is like, hey, I don't want to come off the bench, trade me. That could have been a possibility. But just in terms of how good the players are, Vanderbilt is the big pickup for Utah, I think. But Gobert, of course, is the real story here. I mean, to me, he's the best defensive player in the league and a Hall of Famer right now if he were to retire. People don't like him because he's French and he's helped start the COVID outbreak in the United States. But come on, he's such a good player on the court. He's amazing.
Man, I kind of like it. And I mean, what's fascinating to me, so here's what's going to be odd. With Vanderbilt, I think the Jazz can do better than expected, which is going to be a little frustrating because in terms of at least the production debate between Donovan Mitchell and Gobert, I've been on Team Gobert for years. I'm also conflicted on that Donovan Mitchell seems really cool off the court, whereas Gobert has done some stupid stuff that we don't like. So that gets into a hard place to be. But with the Jazz, the real issue wasn't Gobert. The issue is Mitchell. The issue is you're paying too much money to Donovan Mitchell, and he is an okay player, but not great. And really, you should trade up on that. That's what we've been saying about and we'll be saying in a few minutes about like players like Bradley Beal. It's like, it is completely understandable that if you have a 20 points per game player that is asking for a max contract, that you have to sign them to the max contract or trade them for assets. And you might trade them for a max contract and then trade them out for assets. And that's actually what happened with like Kevin Durant. They didn't do it optimally, but the Golden State Warriors, as an example, the reason they were able to afford Andrew Wiggins was because they signed and traded Kevin Durant and for D'Angelo Russell, and then had D'Angelo Russell's contract available to trade for someone else. And so it is really, really key for a player like Donovan Mitchell. Yeah, you don't let him walk out the door for nothing. But at the same time, if they're like, if you're kind of doing optimization, in an article I wrote at nerdnumbers.substack.com on Jalen Brunson being underpaid, he is not, or overpaid rather, he is not overpaid. He's paid just right? Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I made the observation there's a very simple heuristic you can do for an NBA team, which is you sign good players, you don't sign bad players, you look for star opportunities when they're available, and you upgrade, right? And it's a very computer sciencey approach. And so a player like Donovan Mitchell, eventually you hit a point where you're like, we're giving too much money to this player and he is worth a lot more and we could upgrade him. And they just, when it came down to Gobert versus Mitchell, that fell apart. I really need to look at that. I really want to see what happened in that series because, I mean, maybe eye test radar, I'm really curious production wise what happened between the Dallas Mavericks and the Utah Jazz. And I've just been too busy to look at it in depth. I'm definitely curious about that.
I remember Mitchell having a rough series, but I could be wrong.
That is true, but I mean, I don't know. But I guess I'll just say, like, I will be very curious to see what Utah looks like next year. I am very excited about the Timberwolves, in part because Gobert is fantastic. Anthony Edwards, don't think he was the right pick to pick with the number one pick, but he has improved, and it's hard not to love him, right?
He is so great on camera, Dre. He's amazing. Oh, Dre's freezing up here. Let's see if he comes back, but I'll keep talking for a little bit. Yeah, it's gonna be really interesting to see what happens with the Jazz because we're like I said, we're sitting here on July 6th, and there's talk that they are not done. They might try to
It's
move
just not.
Mitchell. They might try to move someone else. Oh, Jay, it sounds like you're back.
Oh, ooh, oops.
Yeah, you
When did you
froze
lose
up
me?
for a little bit. Not
Oh
too long
man.
ago, about 20 seconds ago.
All right. Well, I'm getting on to free agents. I was saying I was going to start talking Bradley Beal, and I was very confused. Like, trying to move Mitchell. What are you talking about? But anyway,
I was just stalling for time. Yeah, a lot of the rest of the trades aren't great. I'll point out that as part of that Atlanta San Antonio deal, Jock Landale was moved, and he's an Australian. He played at St. Mary's College down the road from me, following the tradition of Patty Mills, Matthew Dellavedova, and a lot of other Australian players that come play in the East Bay before going to the NBA. So it's great to see Jock Landale, who absolutely dominated college and is one of the best players, I think 3 or 4 years ago when he was in college. He might get a chance to get some minutes now in the NBA. Anyway,
all
let's
right.
go to free agents.
Okay, Bradley Beal, like basically overpaid, classic Wizards overpaying for a player, but that's his market rate. My 2 cents is if you were going to do this to Brad Beal, you'd probably want to sign him. But that being said, is what it is.
Yeah, the thing about Beal is he's overpaid for sure, but I'm trying to remember. We recorded some of this and some not, so maybe I'm repeating myself. But he's similar to Brunson, which we're going to talk about soon. In that the Washington Wizards and the New York Knicks are not great free agent destinations. It's really hard to get a real like bona fide max player to come there. So the fact that Beal's willing to play in Washington for the Wizards, even though he's not great, is something, and the fans like him. So it's not going to do a lot for winning, but the team's trying to make money, so they're bringing their guy back.
They're incorrect because the way to make money is to win.
That's
But
right.
as I kind of noted, I'm okay between Ted Leonsis and Dean Oliver, who I've had interesting, I kind of love-hate relationships over the years in the analytics community with them. I'm okay if they keep struggling for a little bit.
And
So
it's worth
that's my
pointing out, this is true every year, but since this was the biggest contract this year at $50 million a year average, it is the biggest contract in the history of the NBA.
love it. Yeah, this year's Mike Conley, basically. All right, number 2, Zach LaVine. I think what we kind of noted on this is that he's maybe a little overpaid, but that is his market rate. Again, same thing. We actually so the difference between Bradley Beal and Zach LaVine is Bradley Beal is over 29 and going down, at least in production. Last year, he was worse than the year before. Zach LaVine, 27, his production has been going up, and he's overpaid a little. That being said, that's his market rate. If you were going to try and look for his point scoring in the open market, and the good news is Chicago Bulls made some good offseason signings, including, we'll get to them in a second, but like Andre Drummond. So they made up the money. So really, all the Bulls are looking for next season is Lonzo Ball to come back healthy, and if so, they're in good shape.
Yeah, I love Zach LaVine. He had a little bit of an off year last year. I think, he was hurt, and a lot of the Bulls were. So, based on last year's production, it's not great. But in general, I love him. So I think the money is fine. The only problem I have with it is the position. Unlike the mainstream, we think shooting guard is not the most valuable position that you can pay. You really need to have a James Harden or like a guy that transcends the position and does things that other positions do on top of it to make maxing out the player worth the money. So I think this is fine.
Well, or alternatively, make sure that the positions that matter, like center, you underpay to, and they got Andre Drummond for like 6.6 million. So that's nothing.
Who's surprisingly young. He's not that old.
Yeah. Although, I mean, he's got a lot of wear and tear. So
That's
we'll
right.
See. Okay,
He's
number
played a lot of
3,
minutes.
Jalen Brunson. I actually wrote a huge article at nerdnumbers.substack on this. This is an absolutely fine trade deal, especially in New York. New York is the biggest market. New York can easily afford to overpay. We just mentioned a winning team is huge. And New York is perennially listed as one of the top 3 most valuable teams, if not usually the most valuable NBA team. And that's in spite of the fact that since James Dolan has taken, they made the finals the year James Dolan took over. And since then have never been close. And like they got to the second round of the playoffs once with Carmelo Anthony, Tyson Chandler, and Jason Kidd. So It is absolutely fine for them to play market rate for Jalen Brunson. He is worth this contract based on last year's salary cap. The salary cap's going up. Jalen Brunson is under 26, so he is in the perfect range we want for a contract, and he looked really good. So, really, the answer, really the bigger answer on Jalen Brunson is that the Dallas Mavericks whiffed, because even if he was going to go out the door, there's allegations of tampering. It should have been via sign and trade. And it's easy to like say, oh, the Knicks cheated by tampering, by talking to a player before they were supposed to. The reality is, though, like, the Mavericks should have had him locked up, and by not having him locked up, that's on them. It's very Jerry Maguire. Those that don't remember the movie Jerry Maguire, he's a sports agent that has a huge, huge name. I just dropped his name, but in
The name of the player in the movie, Rod Tidwell.
good memory. I was actually thinking of the actor Jerry
Tom Cruise?
Tom Cruise.
Wait, I thought Tom
No,
Cruise played Jerry Maguire.
Tom Cruise is Jerry Maguire, the player he is representing.
Cuba Gooding Jr. as
Well,
Rod
that's
Tidwell.
all right. We're way down the rabbit hole on this metaphor, but basically there is a scene in Jerry Maguire where he has a top agent, not Cuba Gooding Jr., that has promised him he's going to sign with him, and then he signs
Oh, I
with
see. A
another agent
third
behind his
character
back.
you're talking about.
And basically the lesson is it's not in writing, right? Like the guy's dad keeps saying, "Well, I've got a handshake as strong as oak," and then sign someone else. So it's like until it's in writing, it doesn't count. And that's the case with Jalen Brunson. So that's kind of on the Mavericks. And that's what I put in the article. I said, if you've got a player like Luka Doncic, you don't have time to be messing around. Just spend the money on Jalen Brunson. They didn't, and it's a good signing by the Knicks. It's kind of a shame because it's kind of a waste by the Knicks. Traditionally, what they've done, that's fine. Now, Anthony Simmons, this makes me sad. I
Anthony
did that
Simons,
pre-show. Yep. You corrected me pre-show, then I did it again, Brian. Thank you. So Anthony Simons by Portland. Now, here's the good news. He doesn't make him worse because he was already on the team, but they definitely overpaid him, as he's a below-average shooting guard, which is what you don't pay for in the NBA. The good news is, though, and we'll get to him in a second, they also picked up Gary Payton II. So a line that Ben Guest and I made on our brief recap of the finals is whatever team picks up Gary Payton II, you should probably bet the over on. So they're not doing great. This is exactly what we're talking about. Teams still don't know what wins games because they spend $100 million on Anthony, they spend $28 million on Gary Payton, but net result is they should still be better. Still not a good contract. This next one, you gave me some insight to, which I really like, Brian, which is Lou Dort, which is, you basically noted, right place, right time. He got paid $90 million because essentially OKC had to spend the money.
Yeah, the way I was following the story on the day it happened was that there was a ticking clock where OKC was under the salary floor, and they had to give somebody the money, and they're like, okay, it's going to be Dort. Now, I'm sure they would say something different, that he's always been our favorite player and been a part of our plans, but it's, we talked a little earlier about how, like, the Kevin Durant sign and trade from Golden State to Brooklyn, right? And they brought back D'Angelo Russell. And the way it was reported at the time is they're like, we had no idea what we're doing. This just fell into our lap. We're so lucky. Well, I have the same comment to both teams is, why are you doing this at the last minute? You knew this was going to happen for months. I wish they had some kind of a plan. In terms of Lou Dort himself, again, like Simons, he's only 23. He's very young. He has upside, and it is a smaller deal. I like defensive players, which Lou Dort is. I haven't seen enough defense for him to justify, a mid-level contract like he got, and his offense is a disaster. He can't shoot at all. It's such a small amount of money that it's probably fine, and, maybe he'll improve and be that player. So bad contract, but not a disaster.
Well, and again, the key thing is getting signed at 10 to 15 mil a year. That would be like on historical NBA. So the way I mentioned is 25 million is kind of the average starter in the current NBA, and that's only going to go up. Like in a year or two, it's going to be 30 million, but it's 25 million a year. So what you could really look at is Lou Dort is a $5 to $10 million a year piece that they can trade at any point, and they're probably going to need to, because I think OKC has acquired like 90% of the draft picks in the upcoming drafts. So with that being said, I'm glad I looked that up.
If he becomes even a slightly above average player, that deal's going to look fine in like 2 years.
Exactly. It's very. I remember this happened with Jeremy Lin back in the day when he got the $8 million a year for Houston. Again, man, how the world has changed, right? Because that was enough to make New York say, "Oh my God, that's too much money." And I kind of made the same observation. I was like, "This isn't enough money to matter," and that it is baffling at this point to say, right, 15 million a year for an NBA team, or like 15 to 20 mil a year isn't enough money to worry about. All right, we have two good in a row, Brian. Next, Yusuf Nurkic got 70 million for 4 years from Portland. Is a player high upside. He keeps getting injured, but still was worth that money last season, right? Because that's below our threshold. He's an above average NBA starter, 25 million a year, so it would be 100 million. 4 years for 70 is fine. Looks good. He's still in his prime, 28 years old. Perfectly reasonable contract.
Yeah, it's a good contract, and the only thing I don't like about it is his fit on the Trailblazers. With Damian Lillard right as their star, and they just don't play enough defense to win in the playoffs. They got rid of C.J. McCollum, and I say got rid of. McCollum's a good player, and looked much better on the Pelicans, in my opinion. But you just can't have too many of those players, right? You need more defenders.
So you replace Lillard with Gary Payton, because that's what they've already done.
That's right.
And you trade Gary Payton for a really good small forward.
Gary Payton makes all this great, doesn't it?
You trade Damian Lillard for, say, like Kevin Durant. You're set. All right, there we go.
Let's see it.
Make it happen. All right, another good one. I'm actually really proud of this one. Mitchell Robinson has looked spectacular for the Knicks. It's really weird for the Knicks to be doing well, Brian. I don't know what to do with this. 4 year for 60 million. That is a steal for his production at the most important position, center, at only 24 years of age. The Knicks are doing good, Brian. What's going on?
No, I love Mitchell Robinson. I think he got underpaid because he's not like this guy with a ton of skills on offense. He's an efficient finisher, but he's not going to, be Karl Anthony Towns and take the ball or anything. But he's so good on defense, and, look who their coach is, right? Tibbs. They need guys like Mitchell Robinson.
All right, next one, Bobby Portis. I hate it. He is the new how did I just drop the name? The Lopez. He is the new Lopez for the Milwaukee Bucks. Namely, a player that was
Bucks had both Lopez's at different times, I think, but Brook was there recently.
Robin was always the correct Lopez. Robin was always on like reasonable contract, looked productive. Brook was the one who kept getting beat up and was never worth money. But Bobby Portis is into his prime, has never looked good as a power forward. 4 years, 48 million. That's not a bad contract, but the problem with the Bucks at this point is they just keep putting mediocre players in too many places, and that's Bobby Portis is below average. So I just hate the Bucks wasting Giannis's prime, and this is another example of it.
I like Portis, so I'm against you on this one. I think it's a good deal, and I like him.
All right, well, we'll see who's right. We'll see who's right. All right, next one, Marvin Bagley III for Detroit. My biggest problem looking over all of Detroit's moves, if this makes any sense, they're not bad, but they're actually proving a point I made in my article on Jalen Brunson, which is they're spending the money at market value, but they keep signing average players. And so if you spend all your money at market rate, you have paid market rate for a 40-win team. And so Detroit kind of makes me sad in this regard. So Marvin Bagley is below average contract-wise and slightly below average. So it's not a horrible deal, but it's just like, if all you sign is below average players, your team's not going to look good. So sorry, Detroit. Cade Cunningham was not a good number one pick, and the players they're signing are not stars. So if you were missing the playoffs, you're going to keep missing them.
Yeah, I'm with you on Bagley. I have a hard time caring about this too much. He's not terrible, but he's not great, and the money's kind of average. The Detroit should probably be taking bigger swings than this with their money as well.
Definitely. Especially as they are in kind of a reasonable. I mean, it's, I don't know, with the Rust Belt decline, kind of a bad market, but
Bagley is only 23 though, so again, with these young players getting a cheap second contract, not the end of the world, really.
Yep. All right, Chris Boucher is how you pronounce that last name for Toronto. Great contract, fantastic player, good signing. If Toronto picks up Kevin Durant, they could go for a run. Not much else to say on that.
Yeah, he's been there quite a while now. It's good to see them bring him back. He's good.
PJ Tucker is interesting, where he kind of had a bounce back year last year with Miami, but he's 37 years old. The contract's not going to kill you. That's what's funny about a lot of these, right? Is we're like 10 million a year. It's not going to kill you, which is true. But Daryl Morey signing PJ Tucker for 3 years, 33 million. I would bet on it. He was above average last year for Miami, but that was following 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 below average seasons. And as I mentioned, he's closer to 40 than 30. Not a fan, but it's not going to kill you. And frankly, if Philly does bad, I don't care because, like I said, I don't like that front office.
Yeah, I think he's just kind of too old to give that kind of money to, unfortunately. He's also not the kind of player they need. I think they need shooters right now. But, he's in good shape and he keeps coming back every year and proving us wrong. So maybe he'll
Like
have a
Steph
great year
Curry
next year.
or Seth Curry. Seth Curry would be great on the 76ers if only they could get a player like Seth Curry.
Yeah.
Seth Curry, so underrated, man. You know, it'd be really nice if he just ended up on the Warriors, right? Warriors should just trade for
It's
Seth Curry to get.
possible. They might.
Yeah,
It's very
yeah.
possible.
Okay, Cody Martin, Charlotte resigns very much, kind of like the Boucher and Mitchell Robinson. Really good player, worth the money, good contract value, good job on Charlotte. Charlotte's looking okay. They got chances. Now the major one, right? I think did I miss that they signed it? I thought they did sign not Zion, right? Am I thinking of the right team? But
Zion re-signed with the Pelicans on a max deal.
I'm thinking Pelicans. Yeah. So
Yep.
anyway, that being said, let's keep going. Tyus Jones to Memphis, fantastic deal, really cheap, really affordable. Big fan of that move.
I've always kind of seen him as like, DeLon Wright or even Jalen Brunson. He's that kind of a player. So with more minutes, he could bust out.
All right, now let's do two back to back. Now, good job, by the way. I didn't realize the second one, so this is good, but this is the sad part. So Gary Payton II leaves Golden State for Portland. Now, it was not cheapness on the Warriors' part, for what it's worth, because Gary Payton signed for 3 years, $28 million, which is criminally underpaid. Great job on Portland to pick him up. And you're saying they're a bad defensive team. Gary Payton's supposed to be a lockdown defender, so really A+ pickup on their part. The reason Portland got him from Golden State is Golden State, as mentioned, was over the salary cap, and Gary Payton got cut twice. If you want to re-sign a player to go over the salary cap, you have to have their bird rights, meaning that you have meaning that player has a contiguous contract of at least 3 seasons that your team has possession of that contract. So, I mean, in theory, Gary Payton could have signed a 1-year deal, a 1-year deal, a 1-year deal, and then Golden State would have his bird rights. But by cutting him, they lost his bird rights, and they simply – the only way they could afford him is if he would have been willing to sign for an exception, and most of the exceptions, I believe, are $6 million or less. So essentially, Portland was able to get him for that reason, and we agree with this, by the way. Gary Payton's got a title. Get your money, Gary Payton. You know, leaving money on the table for a title just is not worth it. The player I use on the Warriors is Kevin Durant. And let's be clear, like the front office explicitly, so the ownership and say Steve Kerr, have not said anything bad about Kevin Durant. The only if his number doesn't get retired, then I will be like, you fucked this up. But they haven't been overtly wrong. But if you look at the fan base and other players, et cetera, like the pundits on ESPN, they've sold Kevin Durant up the river fast. So with Gary Payton, it's like, just get paid. Because if you try and play through injury or leave money on the table, 2 things that Kevin Durant did for the Warriors, the second you're gone or the second you're not productive, they don't care about you.
Yeah, that's right. It's funny, the way the conversation's going with the local media here is different from what you're saying. But I actually agree with you and not them. And here's what I mean by that. The way it's being reported is the Warriors cheaped out. They do have an exception. They could have bid, they could have outbid the Trailblazers if they wanted
Really?
to, basically.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, they do have their exception still because they had, well, here's the thing, Dre, they had his bird rights.
They didn't because
they had the early bird rights.
Oh, early. They still had early bird rights despite the fact that he was cut twice?
He's turning 30, so they have, because he's been in the organization for a long time. So, but here's the point though, is that they are paying the luxury tax. They backed out of it for 1 year to end the repeater, but they did it last year. Now they're going to be another second time repeater this year. And they have said, look, we'll pay whatever it takes. They paid Von Looney, and we'll talk about that later. And they paid all kinds of players, well over, double or triple their salary or whatever in the luxury tax. They just decided for whatever reason, they don't think Gary Payton's that good. And I completely disagree. This is where, what great old school meme, Dre, the Predator meme of, I think it's Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers linking arms, and it's showing like 2 people joining in on something together, right? Well, internet nerds that look at numbers on basketball and internet nerds that are coaches that grind on film, they both agree Gary Payton is a top defensive player. The Warriors fucked up big time not keeping him.
I'm going to have to examine the early bird rights. So read Larry Kuhn's CBA FAQ. I'm only seeing a tax player mid-level for 6.4. And even if
Okay.
they have an Eric Paschal trade exemption that's for 1.7, they might have been able to do just about the same if they're allowed to use both. And I'm not sure about that, but the early bird I'll have to look into.
Yeah.
But to that point, they did pay Kevon Looney 25 million three. That is a fantastic deal.
Yes.
That is the perfect deal for him because he is a player high upside when healthy, has been banged up a ton. I mean, right? Remember, he like broke a collarbone in the finals and had to be told to sit
He's
down.
been around forever, and people think he's like 40, but he's only 26.
He's 26. So I mean, that is perfectly reasonable and worth it. And he was huge. I mean, I argued he was the conference finals MVP. I argued he should have gotten the Magic Johnson Award. So I'm a fan of that.
Here's why it's such a good deal for the Warriors trade. Not only is it so cheap for his production and all that, but he's like a culture guy. And you got to remember, the Warriors still have James Wiseman. And I know, he hasn't proven that he can even stay healthy enough to play basketball, which is sad, but he's healthy right now. Maybe he will get minutes. And if somehow that edge case happens and James Wiseman busts out, Looney has no problem coming off the bench at this salary. And I think that's what they're looking to do. And honestly, I think it's the same thing with Gary Payton. Not only did they screw up and just not realize how good he is, I think the real problem is he's blocking Kuminga and Moody, the young players. And for whatever reason, Joe Lacob likes developing his young players more than winning. It's hard for me to make that accusation when they just won a title, but with the way they act day in and day out, it seems to be true.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bigger reality is just not realizing what wins games. I mean, we've
Yeah.
said that before.
They've had that
and
problem before.
And I mean, and it's also, I mean, there is some sunk costish where with say a player like Andrew Wiggins, they made that trade. The owners saying that was the most important trade in the history of the franchise. Gary Payton, the story is he forced his way on through grit and determination and whatever.
Try to
And
become
so,
the video coordinator even.
and
Ridiculous.
so it's like, yeah, you don't want Gary Payton around because if Gary Payton does well, it messes up your narrative. All right, Brian, we have a ton. I'm going to try and just start kind of like
Yeah,
hitting
we're
a
starting to
couple.
get through most of them now.
All right. I'm actually going to go to the bottom really quick. Juan Toscano Anderson, I'm really bummed because apparently, as you noted, he was a great Warriors and good backstory for the Warriors. He's going to the Lakers. Good job, Lakers, actually spending your money on one place well, because a lot of what the Lakers are doing isn't great. And preying on Anthony Davis and LeBron James to be healthy next season is not a recipe for success. The one note I've made on the Lakers is they're not going to be down and out for long. Give them a few seasons. They'll be back. So enjoy it now while they're weak.
Yeah, I wish Toscano Anderson hadn't gone because, like you say, he's a great story. He's a local kid. And you know how we talk about who a player was discovered by and how they got to the league? He was discovered by Alvin Adels' wife, who was his teacher in school. And that's how he played basketball. What an amazing story. He went to the Lakers at a minimum deal. And also Damian Lee, Steph Curry's brother-in-law, also went to the Lakers. So those two players are gone.
Damian Lee, according to Spotrac, is saying that he went to Phoenix.
Oh, did he go to Phoenix? Okay.
The good news for Damian Lee is at least I mean, he's been good. He's been above average. He was about average last season, and I would say the good news for it used to be with like Gary Payton. The wing is where you've got the most depth, so you should probably be fine. But it wasn't that much money. I mean, it was 2.1 million, so that's one I would have resigned. But
no, it's the same thing as Gary Payton, right? I think they don't want to block Moody and Kuminga. They like those guys. And the other thing is Toscano Anderson and Lee, yeah, very similar players. They're both really good during the 2-year period where the Warriors stunk. They were like the only bright spots. But then it became clear this year when the Warriors were making a title run, they're just not good enough to be in the rotation on a team that is really stacked like this year's Warriors were. So they're going to other teams and they can actually have a chance to play.
All right, let's shotgun a couple. So Aaron Holiday, I noted, looked good in limited minutes for Phoenix last year and was signed for cheap by Atlanta. So Atlanta in the backcourt is looking just
Justin
really strong.
Holiday, his brother, also went to Atlanta, I think. So 2 of the 3 Holiday brothers go to Atlanta.
And they're actually brothers, so I'm not going to get that wrong.
Yes, of course. They're the second and third best Holiday brothers. We know who the best Holiday is.
Troy Brown goes to the Lakers. At least that's it looks like the Lakers, if they spend less than $2 million, actually sign above average players. Then as soon as it's more than that, they don't know what they're doing. Thomas Bryant goes to the Lakers above $2 million. Player that historically has looked above average, but has kind of looked weak recently. So we'll just have to see what happens there. Kind of happy. Finally, some good news for me, Brian. Bryn Forbes leaves the Denver Nuggets for Minnesota. He was terrible last season. So thank goodness the Nuggets actually kind of get some addition by subtraction. I don't care about Raul Neto. Now, this is an interesting one, Ryan. Let's talk DeAndre Jordan briefly. So DeAndre Jordan leaves Philadelphia and actually goes to Denver. And of all of the moves, right? So I'm sad about losing Jermichael Green. I'm sad about losing Monte Morris. DeAndre Jordan signs with the Nuggets, and people are like, oh my God, he's terrible. He's horrible. They're showing these video clips. Production wise, he has been fine. Now, the real issue with him in the last 2 seasons has been minutes. Namely, I think for Brooklyn, he just kind of got sat down. And then for Denver or for Philly and Los Angeles last year, he only played about 600 minutes, but his production was still above average. And I think this is just one of those cases where a permanent player, he still shoots really well. He doesn't do as much, and they're certainly going to be a little slower, but it always baffles me when people are like, oh, he can't play defense. It's like, there is no way he was playing no defense, because if he was really a seed, the other team would score at will, and he's still able to score. So I don't actually hate this move for the Nuggets, but I just don't buy he'll get the minutes or be able to make a difference. But it is just an example of DeAndre Jordan at $3 million for 1 year is nothing. And even if he gives you the exact same production he did last year, even at 500 minutes, it's worth it. And people are like, oh my God, he's over the hill and horrible.
Yeah, he's 34, but I like him a lot more than Boogie Cousins, who's the backup center last year. Yeah. So it's a big upgrade. I mean, here's the thing. He's not one of those centers that can guard, switching on the perimeter on the outside. Like, that's one of the things Gobert can do as a 7-footer, right? DeAndre Jordan can't do that. But you know what? Rebounding is part of defense. Rim protection is part of defense. He can do those things.
And scoring is part of defense too. If we want to be like pedantic in that, because that's what always amuses me, right? As a player, I'll throw friend of the show, Greg Steele, under the bus. We were talking best power forwards, and the names that were given were Elton Brand, Horace Grant, Rasheed Wallace, and I think Chris Bosh.
Oh, I love those players.
And I think I basically said it's Elton Brand for peak. Elton Brand on the Clippers, man, was such a wasted talent. He was so good. Pat Riley tried to save him. Pat Riley tried to give him a max contract, and the Clippers matched with restricted free agency. Elton Brand was a beast and then got injured and was just never the same.
Yep.
And then, of course, Horace Grant is one of the greatest players ever. His jersey should be retired in Chicago. And for those that forget, he made the finals with 3 different franchises, with the Bulls, with the Magic, with the Lakers. And when he made the finals with the Lakers, tried to do this, he was actually more productive than Kobe, because Kobe was still young. Sorry. Horace Grant is just fantastic. Rasheed Wallace came up, and I basically just said Rasheed Wallace was not a good player at offense, and Greg Steele was countering how good he was at defense. And what baffles me about this is it's like, okay, if a player is really good at defense, the argument being they stop the opponent from scoring well, but then on offense, they don't score well, they eat that production. Like, it's not free. If my player blocks a shot, but then misses a shot, that actually cancels itself out. Same thing with DeAndre Jordan. If you're going to argue he's not a great defender, but he's scoring 70% true shooting, as well as getting 20 rebounds per 48, which is ridiculous at his age, he's making it up. So I'll give that.
I'll just say briefly, Jay, before we move on, I've been looking at NBA numbers for about 10 years since I started doing the show with you guys. Before that, I was even more of an eye test fan than I am now. To me, the biggest historic player that I look back on their numbers on that mismatched with me being a fan of them was Rasheed Wallace. I loved him so much as a player, and then seeing how inefficient he was broke my heart.
Well, and it's funny, is that what you could do, right? You look at Rasheed Wallace and you go, hey, if you Ben Wallace it, if you stop shooting, right? If you stop shooting, you could maybe be a star player. That could have happened, right? But then Rasheed Wallace is going to say, hey, I got a max contract, and they let Ben Wallace walk. So same thing with like Marcus Smart. If he didn't shoot so bad, his defensive numbers would be worth the money, but he shoots really bad. And players know. And that's the thing, is that if DeAndre Jordan was getting 5 more shots a game and scoring like 15 points a game, nobody would say he's over the hill. But it's because he's, dropped his rebounds to like 9 a game because he doesn't play full minutes that they're saying that.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to try and shotgun a bunch. Robin Lopez to Cleveland. Who cares? Bisback Biyombo. Phoenix back to Phoenix for nothing. That's a good contract. Goran Dragic to Chicago. Sorry, I think Goran Dragic is over the hill. That's unfortunate.
He's really old.
Wesley Matthews to Milwaukee, same complaint. It's not a problem from a deal perspective. It's a problem from if you have a star player, you cannot waste their prime by giving bad minutes to below average players, which Wesley Matthews is. Philadelphia picks up Trevelin Queen, and apologies, I don't have basketball reference for these pronunciation guides. Hard to say. Very, very only 74 minutes, but above average. So I like this move. That looks good. No idea on Kessler Edwards. Let me see if he shows up. I'm now exceeding my speed. Below average player, so not good.
Kessler Edwards was involved in all these like multi-team deals, so I'm not even sure where he ended up. But he's probably had the busiest offseason.
He's on Brooklyn right now.
Okay, that makes sense.
Anthony Gill goes from Washington back to Washington. Average player to a cheap contract. Same. Okay, good news for Denver. Davon Reed goes back to Denver. That works for me. Bol has never quite lived up to it, but luckily Orlando's still giving him a shot. I'm just happy. I like him. Even this is one of those things like trying to think Kaminsky because he came from UW-Madison. Love the player. His numbers don't back it up, but I love seeing him in the league still. So it's kind of one of those situations for me.
Bol's never been healthy in the league so far.
Never been healthy, never been productive.
He's only 23. Give him a chance.
All right. Javon Carter to Milwaukee, same point, below average player. Why are you doing it?
I like Javon Carter, Drake. Give him a chance. He's not bad.
Give him a chance. Okay, he's 27. One more chance, and he's cheap. All right, there you go. Luke Cornett to Boston. We have loved Boston. That Brogdon deal is really good, and they've got some good play. They've got some good players. They've got some good depth. That is definitely the right maneuver. Damian Jones, average center from Sacramento, goes to the Lakers. That's good-ish, I guess. Sam, did I lose you for a sec?
No, I'm here. No, Damian Jones, he's just never put it together. He's had health problems too.
Yeah. Sam Hauser, and like I said, I hope I'm getting his pronunciations, back to Boston. Boston, good work. So another productive player that they're getting back for a cheap deal. They're doing good. Kevin Knox to Detroit. Now Detroit actually starts slipping a bit below average player. Sorry. Lonnie Walker to the Lakers. Lakers, what are you doing? That's not the contract you want. Now this one's kind of interesting. Joe Ingles would be like the first player to the Bucks that I would approve. So Joe Ingles goes to the Bucks for $7 million a year. He's just slipped out of his prime. Like he was above average up until last year and is now below average. Now, here's the good news. Mike Budenholzer traditionally has improved players. So I could see Joe Ingles having a bounce back season, and it's not too much money. So actually I take it back. I think Joe Ingles is worth, 3-point shooter. That definitely helps Giannis with what you need on that team. This is the first deal for like the Bucks I'm a fan of.
Yeah, it's fine. So I think a lot of players in their mid-30s are like this, like Joe Ingles. Can't play the minutes he used to, but, maybe in the playoffs for stretches, he can still turn back the clock every once in a while.
Exactly. Derek Jones Jr., Chicago, another good move for Chicago. Chicago is actually just looking in good shape, and Andre Drummond. So Andre Drummond, Derek Jones Jr., two players that both signed for around $6 million, both above average players last season. This is fantastic. I just keep hammering this home. It all comes
$6 million for 2 years, though. They're only $3 million per year each.
Oh, is that right?
Yep.
That is nothing. Okay, I missed. Yeah, we have it sorted the correct way. Total contract value, so not per year.
Yep.
That is fantastic. Again, that easily. So to your point, if next year, if Zach LaVine, if Zach LaVine comes back healthy because he was injured, that's going to improve his production. He's getting older. That'll improve his production. Andre Drummond and Derek Jr. are underpaid. This team is doing fantastic. They are also in the third biggest market in the NBA. So. Yep. The Chicago Bulls can afford to overpay a little for a star player as long as they have productive players. And the Bulls, all Lonzo Ball. I really, really hope he's healthy.
Yep.
Okay. Daniel House. Not a great deal, but he's not overpaid. So, I mean, that's okay. Dwayne Dedmon to Miami for $4.5 million a season for 2 years. Average player. He's doing fine. Dante DiVincenzo is.
This is the Gary Payton replacement.
Interesting. So
I can say briefly on DiVincenzo. I like him a lot. He's only 25. He does a lot of good things. Injuries, that's been his problem. If he can get healthy, he can shoot the three. He's a great defender, not Gary Payton level. it's fine. Like,
This is bullshit, Brian. Because yeah,
yeah,
he's going to be as good as Gary Payton somehow. He's gonna boost up, and it's not going to matter one bit because the Warriors are the kings of stumbling on wins. There has not been a team that's been more lucky. Although I think you and I discussed this. If you have a good culture, if you have a team that people want to play for, because that's the issue, right? When you were talking earlier about Washington and New York, it is ironic for you to call them bad free market destinations because New York, as I
yes,
mentioned, is the most lucrative franchise in the NBA, bar none. If the New York Knicks have a playoff team, that's it. That's the bar. If they make the playoffs, they are the most valuable team on Forbes list. In a year, the Knicks make the playoffs, they are the most valuable NBA franchise. No one wants to play because their owner is terrible. Their owner, right, constantly fires coaches, so you never get a consistent culture. Whereas the Warriors, right, Steve Kerr has stayed the course. You've got assistant coaches like Mike Brown who want to come back. Steph Curry really likes it. So it's just like the Warriors keep attracting good players to good value. So good on them, I guess.
yeah, he's
And
definitely the profile of a player that goes through the Warriors rehabilitation program and comes out with a bigger deal afterwards. People thought that part of the reason why the Bucks got rid of DiVincenzo is because they thought they couldn't afford to pay him, and he got hurt, so he didn't get paid. But he's that quality of a player if healthy.
it's funny, actually. I can actually do a nice overarching theme, which is funny. As an analytics person, I cry at how a lot of teams misuse analytics, but then I also come back to these other things. When I come back to things like the Alliance and blitz scaling from Chris Ye and Reid Hoffman, Alliance being how to set up good contracts with short term terms. So the tech industry is really common. 2 years is like ancient in the tech field. And so when you are hiring people, you really want to look at ways to maximize how much they produce and how much you contribute to them in that short period of time, especially leaving on good terms because networking effects are real. If I have an employee that only lasts 2 years, but after 2 years, they leave and go to another company, and then they have a young junior developer that they think is good and they refer them my way, that's huge. And I've argued a lot of times that NBA teams spend too much focus on analytics, and not only do they spend too much focus, they do it wrong, right? They do the worst of both worlds. They focus too much on the numbers and maximizing how much they pay for players, a la Jalen Brunson, and then they don't even use the right numbers. Whereas I've said a lot of these other things, these soft skills, where if you have an environment players like, can be so much more valuable. So the Warriors are fascinating, where I think they get like a C minus in analytics from me, but all these other things I preach, they actually do well. So there you go, Warriors.
Yeah, no, we talked about this not too long ago. Steph Curry is just carrying that franchise, in my opinion, on his shoulders in terms of on the court and off, especially.
And I mean, what I will say, this is getting interesting. We're seeing this in, say, Brooklyn as well. It didn't make it didn't make this list, so we'll probably talk it next show, Brian. But like Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, it's just these are two very interesting players that have
As of
so much.
today, those dominoes have not fell yet. Just
Yeah,
for the viewers, we're not sure where Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant will play in 2023.
we can curse the show and say we won't come back until that's resolved, and then if they can pull a hanky. But anyway, I mean those players are great, but then you also see that they're not teammates that people like beyond their production, so it's very interesting. All right, a couple others. Jalen Smith, below average player to Indiana, but not a great contract, not
I've never heard
horrible.
of Jalen Smith before. Sorry,
Yeah,
Jalen.
he's below. Amir Coffey back to the Clippers, above average, average to slightly above average. Otto Porter Jr. to Toronto. My flippant comment to you on this was that, hey, maybe Toronto is going to pick up Kevin Durant and do a repeat and beat the Warriors in the
They
finals.
might. They might.
Otto Porter Jr., fantastic pickup as a power forward center, almost star level last year for the Golden State Warriors. And now he's going to the Toronto Raptors. So absolutely, absolutely love that.
Reported that his wife is from Toronto. That's how the Raptors were able to land him.
Shout out to Chris Ye, who actually emailed me congratulations on this. Bruce Brown from Brooklyn to Denver. So Brooklyn's going to look worse next year for interesting, like for letting players like Andre Drummond and Bruce Brown at the door, right? Like the funny thing to me is the Brooklyn Nets, they run it back. The Brooklyn Nets gone, if Ben Simmons is healthy, Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant, Bruce Brown, Andre Drummond, and like Seth Curry off the bench. That's a really strong squad. But they're atrophying all of their above average, low paid players. And then, of course, Kyrie and Kevin Durant. Who knows if one or both of them are going to stay? So Bruce Brown to the Nuggets is actually fantastic news. I just can't keep the optimism because very much like the Memphis Grizzlies, the Nuggets have too many below average players for me to believe that they can do it right.
You're gonna like Bruce Brown. He's the kind of
He's
guy.
Fantastic.
He's like the Gary Payton of the Nets. Before, not quite that good on defense, but he's good on defense. I mean, if he keeps developing, he could, make up for all those salary dumps we were bemoaning a few minutes ago.
Yeah, let's find out. I mean, you might be right on off. And you mentioned before the show, like, there's still too many moving parts for us to take a look. So I'm going to have to look at the Nuggets depth chart.
We're not going to do summaries of the team's moves today.
If Jeff Green and Austin Rivers are still on the Nuggets, though, they're in trouble. So John Wall got signed by the Clippers. This will be interesting.
Yeah.
It'll be fascinating to see. Again, this is one of those cases where I am okay with the risk, but I just it's so similar to like Klay Thompson, where it's like this is a guy that the last season he played was below average. And that was 2021. Missed a full, So John Wall has not been a productive player since 2017. Now, admittedly, that's not his fault. That's injury. He got injured in he signed a big contract, got injured in 2018, and has just never bounced back. So it's like, I don't buy any way, shape, or form that it's going to be worth it. I don't think it's a good signing. Maybe it's to placate like Kawhi or Paul George, but not a good deal. Patty Mills, I'll be curious to see what he looks like at the moment because traditionally we've liked Patty Mills, but he might have been getting worse. So let's see. Patty Mills last season was significantly below average, and I'm just going to
be 34.
Yeah, he's out of basically in 2021 and 2022 he's been significantly below average. He's just out of his prime. I don't really like this deal. Yeah, I mean, letting Bruce Brown out the door and then signing Patty Mills for more than Bruce Brown, definitely not what you want to go towards. Yeah. I seem to recall that Isaiah Hartenstein, oh wow, really good. I didn't realize how good he was. So that is a mistake on the clip. Brian, what is with the Knicks? I don't get it. That's another really good signing for the Knicks. The Knicks have done a bunch of good signings. I'm gonna have to look and see if they did any movement on their front office or anything.
I think it's still Tibbs's guys there. I'm not sure who it is, but
that's remarkable. The Knicks are winning. The Knicks are kind of winning free agency in a really, really weird way. So I don't know what's going on. I think
they like big players, so we like their moves.
I think of the contenders, I think you're right. I think Boston, of the teams that are in contention, actually did the most to move themselves forward because Golden State has taken a step back. Phoenix, we're really going to have to see what happens with DeAndre Ayton before going forward. So it's just like, yeah, the Celtics, I think, have one of the contender teams, and I think the Knicks of the close to playoff teams have done the best. DeLon Wright, this is a mistake on Atlanta. I don't know why Atlanta let him walk. He went to Washington for $8 million a year. So Washington may be able to survive the Bradley Beal signing and still be a 41-win first-round exit team.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta's bringing in all these guards, right? So there's not a lot of space.
Yeah, fair enough. I guess that is true, yeah. All right.
They shipped out Herter as well, so they needed to make some minutes.
Kyle Anderson to Minnesota. This is fantastic news. Above average player, really good. I don't know what Memphis is thinking. I don't know what San Antonio was thinking when they let him walk. Fantastic move on Minnesota's part, and it's hard not to be excited. Yeah, right. Between Kyle Anderson, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards is actually looking close to average. So I think next year he's going to go up there. And Rudy Gobert, this team looks in really good shape.
Yeah, I was talking about the roster, Portland before, that it's a problem that Nurkic and Lillard weren't defensive players. So it's good they're bringing Gary Payton, right? This is the same kind of thing for the Timberwolves. They're bringing Kyle Anderson to be their small forward. Great defender. Man, Towns at power forward, Gobert at center, Kyle Anderson at small forward. Don't make fun of me for saying this, but I think those three are all really good, and that's a tremendous front court.
I love it. I love it so much. I think I'm a Minnesota fan, and they're right. I mean, here's what's funny for me. I could go see a game in Milwaukee, and I've yet to, actually. It's kind of funny. I go see a game in Milwaukee. It's about an hour and a half away, and then when you factor in traffic, et cetera, I could catch a flight. I could catch a 1-hour flight to Minnesota because that's a hub airport, and go see a Minnesota game. So it's if I'm going to be a fan with where I live, Minnesota might actually be the team to root for. Ricky Rubio, I did not realize how young he was. He's only 32, but I'm going to say over the hill, Ricky Rubio.
He was playing professionally at 16, if I remember right. So he's been around forever.
I don't understand this move for Cleveland. I mean, but all right. Because it's interesting. They remember this might be like them being nice to him because remember they traded him out to Indiana last year for stuff, and then now they're re-signing him. So maybe it was like a hey, we're gonna send you out, and then we'll get you back.
I'm not sure what they're doing. I don't know if they're gonna. I think Colin Sexton is still out there as a free agent because you remember Rubio became the starting, shooting guard alongside Darius Garland once Sexton got hurt, and that's how the Cavaliers kind of broke out with those two in the backcourt. The 2 point guard lineup. Their lineup was like 2 point guards and three centers. Dre, like what kind of a great lineup is
I
that?
was gonna say, is this on another? Is this on another chart? Because I was gonna say Darius Garland to Cleveland was just depressing. That was a bad signing, and I don't, for
Well,
everybody saying Jalen Brunson was
he's their young
overpaid,
guy. They're gonna go with him, so we'll see if he's good enough.
not worth it. Malik Monk was an above average player slightly for the Lakers in his prime that got signed away by Sacramento. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not excited. At the moment, I'm not excited about the Lakers. Let's see what happens with Russell Westbrook if they're able to move him.
Yep,
That's really
that's
it.
the next shoe to drop.
Nick Claxton for Brooklyn. They re-signed him. Perfectly reasonable. To your point, you said the Dallas Mavericks picked up JaVale McGee, 3 years, 20 million. Now, again, like what's fascinating about that is right, it's 6 million a year, so that's not horrible. And it's even in a place where if the wheels fall off in year two, that's still enough money to just like I kind of bundle up if needed. It's a bold move, but he was significantly above average last season for Phoenix. Let's see if that was a dead cat bounce or if he can keep it up.
Yeah, he's been really good. He's relies on his athleticism, and his intelligence. So at his age, you're kind of worried where the wheels fall off at any moment. But he's good enough that I love this deal. And the Mavericks need. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The Mavericks needed stuff up front. McGee's perfect.
Let's take a look. I can't remember. We are almost overlapping ourselves, so I might repeat a player, Brian. But Caleb Martin back to Miami. Good. I mean, Miami's just a good team. They know what they're doing. I like them. Mo Bamba, I think he's slightly below average, so it's not a great contract signing by Orlando, but it's not going to hurt you. If it's below 20, it's significantly below 25 million, but he's just a below average starter, so it's not great.
He's
I
just
think the
young
last
and still hasn't developed, so we'll see.
Tate back to Houston, same point, below average small forward. But in his prime, last one, Nick Batum to the Clippers, 2 years, 11 million a year, perfectly reasonable contract. He was worth that last season. He's been injured, but worth the upside. Man, Brian, we made it through the entire list. We went through every relevant trade, in my opinion. We went through every free agent that is on the Spotrac free agent list. There's probably going to be there are many, many more to drop if you look at this list. There are a lot of dashes where they still haven't been resolved. So,
Yep.
any other comments, Brian? Because my voice is getting hoarse.
Oh yeah, no, thanks for coming on the show, Dre. We've been going for more than an hour now. Yeah, Kevin Durant is the big story, right? And DeAndre Ayton a little bit less than that, Kyrie Irving as well. But he may end up staying with the Nets. He may force his way off. He may end up back with the Warriors. Who knows what's going to happen? But yeah, we'll probably talk about that soon.
I really think it all comes down to Ben Simmons. And I mean, I think if you can get Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant together, that would be huge. There is so much to say about Kyrie, and we're just going to have to wait for another show on that. That'll be really interesting to see.
Yeah,
All right. I can lead us into shout outs if you're ready.
let's do it.
Let's go to Hikaru Nakamura, who give a almost reasonable performance at the candidates for chess. Was in second place going the last day before falling, but showed just how good he was. Definitely a lot of fun. So enjoyed that, and the new Minions movie. I went to see it in theaters with my son, and I dug it. It was good.
No, my shouts are just happy 4th of July, everyone. 2 days late if you're an American, and if not, then happy whatever. Happy summer.
Happy 7th of July, 8th of July,
Yeah.
9th of July, any day of July. Hopefully you're listening to this in July. All right. Sounds good, Brian. This has been the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you found us not through Twitter, you can find us not through our website. You can find us at the site boxscoregeeks.com. We go live whenever we go live. Today it was 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You can see video recaps of that channel, Nerd Numbers, on YouTube. And of course, you can find us iTunes, Stitcher, wherever podcasts are found, the Boxscore Geeks Show. Brian Foster is our producer, co-host, voice of God. You can find us Twitter's Boxscore Brian. Nerd Numbers is the name I go by at most places. We'll see you when we see you. I think next week I'll probably be streaming Mega Man, Brian, but maybe after that,
Nice.
Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving will be resolved, and we can talk about that.